Courage the Cowardly Dog freaked me out as a kid, and still to this day, I have friends who avoid this show at all costs due to the creep factor they endured as children. I have one specific memory of me, my brother, and sister watching the King Ramses Return the Slab episode until my dad turned it off because we were all visibly horrified. With that said, I've always loved this show and have fond memories of it, but I haven't watched it, other than the occasional Google of Return the Slab, since the early 2000s. However, since I revisited Ed, Edd and Eddy's finale last year, I have become more curious about how some of my favorite cartoons from childhood ended. So, I spent the last few weeks binge-watching all 52 episodes of Courage the Cowardly Dog, and what I experienced was a show unlike what I remembered. Courage the Cowardly Dog's finale is not like the typical episode of this series. As was commonplace for cartoons from this era, each episode of Courage the Cowardly Dog consists of two different stories. The first story of the final episode served as an origin for Courage, and the second story focused on Courage coming to accept his imperfections. In order to really explain why I think the finale of Courage works so well, I want to briefly talk about my experience rewatching the show to provide some context. The first season of Courage the Cowardly Dog was very clearly a show still trying to find its footing. Courage talks a lot more often in this first season, and the very early episodes tried to give Courage a catchphrase that never once landed for me.
I have a bad feeling about this. Well, my name is Ivana, and it's not. I'm telling you, there's someone here. Or my name's Shirley, and it's not. There was something on the other end of that pie, or my name's Aloysius, and it's not. Something smells fishy, or my name is Stinky Lulu, and thank goodness it's not.
I think one of the best decisions the series ever made was dropping that as soon as possible. On average, I found the first season to be the weakest from a storytelling perspective. The plots were thinly written and often felt copy and paste with a replacement monster of the week. Of course, there were some real smash hits in that first season, such as King Ramses' Curse, Freaky Fred, and The Hunchback of Nowhere. The latter being an episode that really hinted at the core of what this show was truly about. Something that would continue to shine through as the seasons progressed and the storytellers worked out the kinks and became more experienced and confident. The Hunchback of Nowhere was Courage the Cowardly Dog's version of The Hunchback of Notre Dame. It wasn't too original, but within that first season, this episode really stands out. It focuses entirely on insecurity and perspective. Obviously, the Hunchback doesn't look like the average person, and Eustace constantly berates his appearance, and yet, Courage befriends him because they enjoy each other's company. Eustace continues to mock the Hunchback's appearance throughout the episode, until the Hunchback defends Courage from Eustace by showing him true ugliness. He dons a mask of Eustace and repeats the insults Eustace was lobbing at Courage. By the end of the episode, the Hunchback has found renewed optimism in the kindness of people thanks to meeting Courage and Muriel, and continues his travels. Throughout this series, there are many episodes that are about villains, monsters, and generally bad people who are doing bad things because of their own insecurities. Of course, there are a large portion of villains who are just bad and that's that. But the best Courage villains, the ones that stuck with me, are those who are lashing out or are misunderstood. Typically, these antagonists are defeated when they are faced with an act of kindness, which causes a better change in them by the end. Muriel's entire role throughout the series is acting as the epitome of not judging a book by its cover, always willing to meet even the most grotesque creatures with kindness. I can list a number of sympathetic or misunderstood antagonists on your screen now to show you how often the monster of the week just needed a little kindness or reassurance in order to change. Personally, I really didn't remember this aspect of Courage the Cowardly Dog. Before my rewatch, when I thought back on this show, I just remembered the unsettling character designs, creepy monsters, and of course, a ton of screaming. Perhaps the subtleties of stories like The Mask and The Tower of Dr. Zaslost were lost on me as a kid, which means I must have been one dense child because the messages are quite on the nose. Even looking at the three main characters, it's clear that the show was designed with this dynamic in mind. Muriel is essentially pure kindness, while Eustace is one of the cruelest characters ever put to screen. They both represent two different sides of human behavior when faced with the unknown, and Courage's attachment to Muriel is a clear signifier that her way of thinking, though often airheaded, is the better way to live. It is through Muriel's open heart that many of the villains, and even Courage himself, work through their insecurities. That brings me to finally talking about the last episode. A large part of the audience's journey for the show is coming to terms with the fact that no one is perfect. Not the creators, writers, animators, anyone who worked on the show, not even Courage or Muriel, and especially not Eustace. But that's okay. That is the subject that the finale really tackles. The first part of this episode, Remembrance of Courage Past, is all about an event that haunts Courage, the regrets he has, which informs his actions throughout the entire series, and how he confronts his past failures. The story begins with Muriel making Courage empanadas, and as we all would, he washes those bad boys down with a tall glass of milk. On the back of the milk carton, Courage sees a list of missing dogs, and this sends him into a near comatose flashback to his past. Here, we see a baby Courage, complete with a little diaper, who is taken to the vet by his parents. While there, the vet asks to speak to Courage's parents alone. Courage then sees the vet capturing his parents in a net and taking them into the back of his facility as his parents scream for help. In the present, Courage is so distraught by this memory that he hasn't moved for nearly a day. Eustace tries to scare him with his mask, but for the first time in the whole series, it has no effect on Courage. Naturally, and ironically, Muriel and Eustace decide to take Courage to the vet. Back in the past, we see that the vet has a crazy rocket facility in his office, and he sticks Courage's parents into a rocket. In the present, Courage is taken to that same vet, but this time, he runs away and heads straight to that rocket facility while being chased by the vet, who remembers Courage, and Muriel, who is concerned for Courage. The storytelling continues to cut back and forth as the actions of the present echo the actions of the past. In the past, we see baby Courage struggling to rescue his parents as the launch ticks down. He is spotted by the vet as his parents beg for help, and Courage is forced to run away. Seeing an opportunity to escape, he takes it, leaving his parents behind as they are sent up into space. In the present, Courage escapes from the vet, who has put Muriel and Eustace in the rocket ship with the countdown clock ticking. Rather than running away, Courage pushes right past the escape hatch he used in the past and fights back so he can free Eustace and Muriel. When captured once again by the vet, Courage does what he does best, screams straight into his stethoscope, neutralizing him so Courage can get the key to the door. In a clear mirroring of past and present, Courage rescues Muriel and Eustace in a way he couldn't rescue his parents. They escape the facility after sticking the vet on the rocket, where he flies off into space. In the past, we see Courage crying alone in an alleyway with no idea what to do next. That's when Muriel spots him, tells him he has such courage for sitting all alone in a scary alley, and decides to take him in, telling him that they'll have a grand time together. I absolutely adore the storytelling here. Within 11 or so minutes, we are shown just how important the original encounter with the vet was to Courage, how it shaped who he would become, and how much he has grown in the time since Muriel adopted him. Courage may be a cowardly dog, but we see a concrete example that he has enough courage and dedication to redeem his greatest regret. Although Muriel and Eustace aren't his biological parents, and Eustace is a damn dick, they are Courage's family, and while Courage hasn't always been perfect, hasn't always been able to do the right thing because of his fears, this time, he has made sure to save the ones he loves, and there's some beauty in that. But there is a second half of this episode that, frankly, I found to be a bit lackluster. I much prefer Remembrance of Courage Past as a definitive ending. It just feels right for this series. However, we don't live in Denny land, where everyone dresses like Fred from Scooby-Doo, and I control the pickle and brine market with an iron fist. This is the real world. And in this world, the final story told in the original Courage the Cowardly Dog series was perfect. Now, my issue with this episode is that I don't think it is perfect. In a finale, I think that the best way to wrap things up is by giving the audience a flavor of what they loved about the show, while still offering a level of closure. I think Remembrance of Courage Past hit the nail right on the head, because Courage still has to face some Monster of the Week and save Eustace and Muriel, but there's just a little bit extra that makes it special. Perfect doesn't really feel like an episode of Courage. It features all the characters and has its fair share of creepy visuals, but it just doesn't give me that Courage hit I'm looking for from this show. With that said, there is an obvious reason that Perfect was the very final story, as it directly connects to the long-running theme of insecurity I mentioned earlier. Perfect begins with Courage helping to do some chores around the farm, but he keeps doing them the wrong way according to Eustace. Eustace then receives a bugle in the mail, but it's cracked. He claims he'll fix it, while Muriel invites Courage to help her make baklava, something she's never made before. In the kitchen, Courage screws up the cooking prep and becomes disappointed in himself, despite Muriel telling him not to worry. Courage is then confronted by the Perfectionist, an old schoolmaster that only Courage ever sees, likely a figment of his imagination, who begins berating him over his imperfections. She criticizes the way he walks, talks, his posture, and his creativity. She begins to give him lessons on how to be perfect, and in between, Courage goes to bed where he has horrible reoccurring nightmares about his imperfections. The final one is a disturbing dream where it appears that he is about to accidentally shatter a vase Muriel trusted him with, only to have the vase be fine, but Muriel shatters instead. After being thrown out of the bedroom for screaming all night, Courage is told by a fish in the bathtub that there is no such thing as perfect. That Courage is beautiful as he is, and with all of his imperfections, he can do anything. Courage then runs into Muriel, who has screwed up her baklava, but still finds the positive side of things and offers it to Courage, while Eustace is having a blast with his broken bugle and happily declares that he's going to start a band of cracked horns. Courage then sends the Perfectionist away by fulfilling her tasks his own way and by being himself, with all his imperfections. In the end, while this episode wasn't the perfect episode of Courage the Cowardly Dog, that's okay. Courage is a character who isn't perfect. Even his name is an oxymoron, and he is constantly trying to better himself in order to care for the ones he loves. Both halves of the final episode hit this theme, showing that there's no such thing as perfection, and even if you screw something up in the past, you can always overcome your problems and better yourself in the future without losing who you are. Courage will always be a cowardly dog. That is who he is. Perhaps that's his greatest imperfection. But throughout this show, we witness this little dog face some of the most horrific monsters and villains put to screen in a kid's cartoon, and he always manages to overcome his imperfections, achieve his goals, and sometimes better those around him as well. So, those are my thoughts on the finale to this truly unique cartoon. Now, I want to know what you think about this ending. Did you enjoy it? Do you remember watching it when it originally aired? Were you just as freaked out as me watching this show growing up? Also, please let me know if there is another cartoon from this era that you'd be interested in me revisiting. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this, and until the next time, I'll shut up.
Stupid dog!